Hello and welcome everyone. This is Galip Dalay. I am Senior Consulting Fellow at Chatham House. Today we will be discussing the Iran-Israel war and its broader regional implications. Following the 13th June Israel's attack on Iran, the two countries have engaged in the most intensive escalation to date. And today we will be unpacking the strategic objectives of the both countries in this war, and what is the possibility for diplomatic de-escalation, what will be the broader regional implication of this war, and whether the regional countries, the Gulf countries, can play a role in the de-escalation. To do so, we have a stellar lineup of speakers. Here with us, we have Sanam Vakil, the Director of Middle East and North Africa Program at Chatham House. We have Ksenia Svetlova, who is our Associate Fellow at Middle East and North Africa Program here at Chatham House as well. We have Renat Mansour. Renat is also the Senior Research Fellow with us at Chatham House and also Director of our Iraq initiatives. And we have Mohammed Baharoun, who is the Dubai Public Research Center, the General Director of the Dubai Public Research Centers. So we are very pleased to have you all here with us. Just some housekeeping notes. This is live stream, so we are on the record. And for the Q&A, for the questions, please use the Q&A box there that you can see. And after the initial remarks, after we have done the first or possibly the second round of the conversation with the speakers, I will be looking at the Q&A box as a box and pose your questions to the relevant speakers. With this, without further ado, Sanam, let me start with you. I mean, first, a very generic question. So what is the implication of this war for Iran, for Iranian leadership? But most importantly, at this stage, what are the strategic objectives for Iran in this war?
Thanks so much, Galip, and great to be here today with a stellar team, as you described. This is a very most severe moment for the Islamic Republic, for its leadership. I think it's safe to say this is nothing short of existential, the most profound of all of the crises that the Islamic Republic has faced. This is the gravest and most serious one. It's worthwhile, of course, remembering the last time Iran was in a military war of this kind. It was with Iraq, and I'm struck every time I'm reading, and my brain has been used to seeing Iran and Iraq together, and this is an Iran and Israel war that I think is very much designed to decapitate the leadership of the Islamic Republic and degrade the nuclear and broader military capabilities of the regime, as it's oftentimes referred to. Over the past 4 days, we've seen deep Israeli intelligence penetration inside Iran that is both embarrassing, but designed to, of course, suggest broader aims, and we can talk about what those might be. We've seen, of course, direct strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, specific damage to Natanz and to the Esfahan facilities. But there are many more on the ground that remain operational, with, of course, the principal and most important facility being Fordo, that is heavily fortified under ground and has yet to be taken out by the Israelis. And of course, there are questions whether that is possible by the Israeli military forces on their own. I think Iran has been exposed as those of us who've been watching Iran for quite some time have known it is the weaker party. Its military capabilities have been asymmetrical, but it's of course been exposed to be really vulnerable in this moment. And we've seen attacks on energy facilities. I think psychologically, the war has also been very damaging in terms of confidence to a system of governance that has been struggling to maintain legitimacy. And the targeting of Tehran in particular has created real pressure on the system, on the state, has alarmed ordinary people. The high loss of life and the lack of protection by the government, the lack of facilities to manage this war, I think will have a longer term tail depending on how this all ends, or if and when this ends. To answer your second question, what are the goals here for the Islamic Republic, which is separate perhaps for the people and other constituencies here? I think the primary goal is to prove their staying power. This is a test of time, of how long the Iranian system can resist as the weaker party. And if you do the math, I'm not someone that counts missiles, but if you do the math, of course, Iran can only hold on for so long. So Iran is just going to try to demonstrate its resilience, show that its command structure is intact, show that the government continues to operate despite the penetration, the strikes, the targeting of cities, which is reminiscent of the Iran-Iraq war. They want to avoid capitulation. So knowing that this will somehow end at a negotiating table, they want to be in the best terms possible. At the same time, they do want to inflict damage on Israel, and they want to demonstrate their, albeit limited capabilities to do so, that they can still do so. I think it's important to put ourselves in the mindset of the leadership that does still exist in Iran. It's an institutionalized system. There's a very big bureaucracy and a command structure under the IRGC that will continue to rebuild and replace key individuals that have been taken out. But the mindset is very much a David versus Goliath, and they see themselves as the David against the Israeli Goliath. Ultimately, they would like to wear the Israeli political and population down and see international pressure grow and mount to stop this war and to get to a ceasefire. But I don't think that ceasefire is going to take place while the military campaign and the strikes on the cities very much continue. So we're in a bit of a moment where also we're waiting to see what the US and President Trump does. I think this is a key fork in the road moment where the US entry into this war or the US staying out of this war will be really critical for how the leadership and Iran in general emerges from this conflict. But perhaps we can come back to that later.
Senem, maybe just actually what you emphasize in terms of the political psychological impact of this war, and particularly for the regime. And today, if I'm not misquoting you, I read one of your quotes. Basically, you were saying, I think in Financial Times, survival is the victory at this stage for the regime. And given that Israel is not hiding its intention of the regime change, how the regime itself do you expect to be affected from this process? Do you see the possibility of the regime collapse?
Well, of course, that's the $10 billion question that I spend hours a day trying to answer and anticipate. Collapse, I don't think, is the immediate outcome. I think what we can see is an unraveling over time. And I think that the Israeli objectives are not to be responsible responsible for regime change, but to take credit for it when it comes. Iran has already been in transition. Israel is pouring an accelerant on a process, but unfortunately, this process is no longer going to be managed or controlled by external actors or parties, or necessarily by the internal alignment as well. So I certainly see change in the regime, but and there are many outcomes. We can talk about what that could look like. Israel is looking for a contained, weakened, militarily constrained Iran, where Israel can always have the right to attack and the right to respond, similar to what we've been seeing in the Lebanese or Syrian frontier. Or we can imagine, if you dust off your history books, an Egypt-like scenario after the Six-Day War.
Another interesting point maybe for the second round would be the intertwining between the regime and state. So if, let's say, there's an the unraveling of the regime, would that means also the unraveling of state, and obviously the very dire consequences for the region will be very much discussed as well. Ksenia, very similar questions. What are the strategic goals that Israel is pursuing at this stage? And how does the Israel view the U.S. response thus far? Is it optimistic that the U.S. will join the fray, or is the U.S. is resisting this temptation?
Thank you very much, Galip, and thank you for Chatham House for having this important discussion today. Well, first of all, the declared goal of Israeli government, of the Israeli system, also the military, is of course the degrading of Iran's nuclear and ballistic programs. This is what we hear repeatedly from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, from military speakers, from Minister of Defense, and so on. In between the lines, you also hear a bit of a doubt that Israel can alone, and here, your two questions are intertwined, of course, whether Israel can achieve some of the declared goals without the involvement of the US in this war. So you hear from day one, or from people such as Tzachi Hanegbi, the head of the National Security Council, that everybody knows, that's what he said in an interview to Channel 12, that Israel cannot accomplish this goal alone, and it's impossible to destroy completely the Iranian nuclear program. So therefore, the goal is to weaken significantly Iranian regime, to degrade its capabilities, but then eventually to get it to the negotiation table, and perhaps to strike a deal that will be much more acceptable, by the US and of course by Israel and by the rest of the world, by the way, as well. That today is also voicing out its concern for the accelerating of Iran's nuclear possibilities. In regards to the question of the survival of the regime, so there is a debate that's ongoing in Israeli political and diplomatic and security milieu about, again, the possibility to achieve their proclaimed goals without the downing of the Iranian regime, without eliminating the current Iranian regime. So I have to mention that there is an unbelievable consensus about this war, unlike the war in Gaza, unlike the war in Lebanon, unlike any other war, perhaps that Israel waged so far. And the population is indeed very supportive, despite the deep divides in the society, despite the ongoing protests that, of course, they were postponed because of the security situation. But nevertheless, there is this unbelievable support and also expression of resilience. So there is a significant price that Israel is paying. And again, it's not resembling the previous Iranian attacks last year and the war in Gaza or the war with Lebanon. The price is much more painful. And nevertheless, you do hear from the ordinary people, yes, we are ready to pay the price, but only if you are ready to go all the way. All the way, it means including the toppling of the Iranian regime. So I will switch now to the question of the US and its involvement in what is happening today. So I would say, this is the state of, I would say, this wishful thinking. I believe that, from day one, there was this hidden but well displayed still desire to see the Americans involved in the war. So although, there were statements by officials that were made about Israel designing this war blue and white, meaning only Israel will, fight eventually the Iranians, and not counting on the US, but you do see through the promotional videos that the IDF is publishing, through the declarations, of Prime Minister and other ministers as well, that there is an understanding that at least as we discuss the fate of the nuclear object at Fordow, it will impossible to goal of really, degrading this site, degrading seriously the Iranian nuclear project without involvement of the US and its weapons and its fighter jets that have different capabilities than that are available in Israel. So we do understand that the Trump factor is unpredictable, and I think that nobody today with certainty can say that whether US will eventually join this military adventure or not. But I can tell you that you have more and more voices. These voices are traditionally affiliated with the opposition, such as this of the ex-Prime Minister Ehud Barak, that expressed criticism towards the government, not in regards to waging the war against Iran, not about the timing even, because the opposition, of course, could suggest that it is happening in the context of the ongoing protests, the war in Gaza, the hostages, the draft bill in the end of the day, and many other reasons. But what we do hear from key opposition figures such as Barak is that if this war was designed with the hope that the US will join, but eventually it will not, then it's a serious miscalculation that can cost Israel a dear price, and eventually, yes, can even bring Iran closer to the nuclear bomb than today.
Exactly on this point. So, assuming that US didn't join, like, what strategic objectives can Israel plausibly achieve? And will we see an Israel after this war emerging within the regional context worse off or better off without the US participation?
Yes, well, this is indeed, like Sonam said, a $10 million question, or even more, considering that every day of this warfare costs to Israel, as we understand, billions and billions of shekels. Well, I can tell you that there is still an ongoing debate about whether Israel will be better or worse. The majority of the voices that we hear today, even from the more critical part of the map of the think tankers and the analytics and so on, believe that Israel will still be better off, because we do see that right now, and according to IDF, about 40% of the launchers were exterminated on the ground. And we do see that despite the promises of the leaders of this Islamic Republic to put a deadly blow on Israel and to use all of its possibilities and some new weapons that were not tried yet and so on, we actually see that the amount of rockets that they use in every launch is diminishing. So they started with 100 rockets per launch and then with 50. And for the last 24 hours, it's 20 to 30 rockets. So it means that they're trying to save and to make the remaining rockets last as long as possible. And basically used for Israel that was always concerned not only of Iran's nuclear capabilities, but also of this ballistic program. And this was something that was, of course, expressed during the discussion about the JCPOA, that the ballistic element was not considered there, was not present there. So today, I think that we understand that there is some achievement in this regard. So considering that point, I can tell you that there is this satisfaction in the military command, at least, about what was achieved so far. As for the nuclear capabilities, well, I think that again, and despite all of the achievements that were presented to the Israeli people, such as the strike on the Israeli television, I personally don't, think that striking Iranian television will, help Israel avoid the scenario in which Iran will brandish a nuclear bomb within 6 months or 1 year or whatever it takes. So in the end, the question is whether the nuclear capabilities were harmed. From what we understand, and it's only been 4 days of this war, they were not seriously harmed to the degree that we can really talk about game changer here. And the big question is whether they will accelerate, whether they will be able to, according to their capabilities, to accelerate this program after the war will end, whether it will end at the negotiation table or in any other way.
I mean, one of the paradoxes that I see from also your remarks, that the possibility of degradation of Iran's missile capabilities, while at the same time potential acceleration of its nuclear capability, and I don't know what kind of strategic picture that will present Israel going forward. Renat, I mean, Iraq particularly, probably one of the countries that will be the most affected, potentially along the Gulf, with this war. So, how is the Iran's regional allies are responding to this, and more specifically, how the war is redefining Iraq.
Thank you, Galip. This war, but definitely the post-October 7th climate is a Middle East that's changing. And many of the regional allies, many of the regional groups and regional states are uncertain where it's heading. So it's right now a mode of survival. Every group, every state is in survival mode. As they begin to see the unraveling of an old order and the kind of transition towards a new Middle Eastern order that no one knows where it actually will end up. So, when we talk specifically about the groups, Iran's traditional allies, be that Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has been weakened and degraded. Of course, the Assad regime was removed at the end of last year. Some of the PMF groups, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, for them, it's all survival mode. Obviously, Assad's out, but for Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the PMF. And crucially here, the word proxy, which for a long time we have been pushing back against, these being Iranian proxies, is further being challenged. Because for each one of them, it's about local interests. How does Hezbollah in Lebanon, try to fight for its very existential position in the Lebanese state as it's transforming? Similarly, in Iraq, where many of the PMF groups, including those linked to the axis of resistance, haven't, notwithstanding all the conflict we've seen, they've had less conflict. And in fact, the economy is booming. So they're making a lot of, money and they're being very successful in the Iraqi state. So as many of them tell us, it's not the time right now for resistance, right? Fundamentally. And the Houthis as well, yes, October 7th has been an opportunity for them to put themselves on the global stage as such an, influential actor that could stop global trade. The point here is each one of these groups is not just a proxy of Iran, but responding first to their own local interests. And for many of them right now, business, conflict is bad for business, and business means we need some stability, at least at the local level. And this is all part of another change we've seen, which began at the end of Qasem Soleimani, when Qasem Soleimani was assassinated by the US, which is the Iranian model began to unravel after then, in that it was no longer a top-down organization. The IRGC Quds Force no longer commands the axis of resistance, but actually it turned into a horizontal movement, where even people like Hassan Nasrallah were making decisions, as Hezbollah or PMF leaders or Houthis. So it's a much more decentralized and a much more horizontal movement, as I say, as each group pursues their interests. And at the end of the day, as the Middle East continues through this transformation, something important, I think, to note is that, this idea of spheres of influence, or this idea of ideologies, as important as they are, right now are being challenged by very, very sort of primary survival modes, which are economic, which are political, much more than this wider, broader trend. As I say, they don't know where they don't know where this will end, but they want to make sure that they aren't, completely removed from this. Hezbollah's lesson is learned throughout the region. So PMF groups know that, okay, we could start firing at Israel more than we already, of course, PMF groups have done. But what would this mean for our own stability? And to go back to your question about Iraq, in this new Middle East, Iraq isn't the center of the conflict. Whereas Iraq for many decades was the center of conflict. So Iraq has somehow remained insulated from the post-October 7th violence. So whereas everywhere else where you've seen an axis of resistance, Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, Syria, you've seen attacks, Israeli attacks, Iraq has largely remained insulated. And this is very important for the group to keep that insulation, because conflict is, again, bad for their local interests. So I think to conclude then, there is a changing Middle East order. There aren't no rigid, spheres of influence. There's many, many economic deals being made here and there. And, the region is awash with economic deals. But sadly, these deals, aren't necessarily, are happening at the same time when you have war. So something still fundamentally isn't there. You have so many deals and so much war, much more conflict in the region than in the last few decades. And so many of the groups, they don't know where this is going. And for them, again, to conclude, it's about survival.
Renat, I mean, it seems that I asked everyone $10 million question. I will be asking you one as well. So assume that the war is expanding and the US is also joining the fray. Would this mean that Iran's regional allies, most importantly in Iraq, would also join the fray in one way or another? Do you think, or even in this scenario, do you think that they will stay out of it?
Well, Iran has had a problem in Iraq for many years, primarily that the groups in Iraq aren't united. There isn't one Hezbollah or one Houthis. There are many different groups that make up the Popular Mobilization Forces. As I say, some of these groups are in the state, they're in the government, and they're doing really well with the current government in Baghdad. And they've seen the lessons learned. I mean, you know, they were attacked by the US in January 2020. The leader of the PMF, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, was killed at that point. So they know the consequences of this. And again, to make another point clear, these groups at some point, yes, developed from the support of Iran, but for many, many years, these groups have their own economic independence, have their own political independence. And so they will make their own assessment. There will be some rogue groups like Kitab Hezbollah potentially, or Harakat al-Nujaba, that, you know, see themselves as part of this resistance ideology. But for many of the PMF groups, you know, we've been going to Iraq over the last few years since October 7th. Many of them conclude that this conflict is bad for their business right now. You're on mute, Gallup.
Yes. Mohammed, Gulf is basically probably the most important scene in this war, both in terms of the effect of this war on the Gulf geopolitics, but also the potential role that the Gulf can play in de-escalating the tension, mainly through the US. So how do you see the Gulf's actors responding to this escalation? But more importantly, what roles can they play in de-escalating the tension? And I also see in the Q&A, there are quite many questions that is very much directed to the Gulf dimension. So I will be posing them afterward as well.
Thank you, Gallup, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss this ongoing issue. Let's talk first about the implications for the Gulf. Is this a conflict similar, let's say, to Gaza, where we can try and help with it, but we're not directly impacted by? I don't think this is the case right now. There is serious worries about the radiation in the Gulf. People in many, Gulf countries can actually see the missiles passing by, either from Iran to Israel or vice versa. This is now a clear and present danger. It is already touching national security of the region. The very latest collision of the shores of Khor between two ships is unusual, but a lot of speculation that this has to do with electronic warfare and GPS jamming that is affecting an accident. I mean, we've already seen an attack on Pars field, which is connected to Qatar. So the debris is coming closer and closer to the region. This is not a conflict that we can watch on TV anymore. It's a conflict that is touching to us. And here comes the bigger implication for countries, particularly like the UAE. At a certain point since Gaza started, we've been saying that, well, we wanted Israel to be a partner in peace. Israel wanted to be a partner in security. Today, Israel is becoming a source of instability. I mean, if we're afraid on getting water from our desalination because of a possible radiation, there is an ongoing direct attack on active reactors in Iran, then this is not a partner, neither in peace, neither in security. Actually, it's a source of insecurity in the region. And that is quite difficult. If the US participates. And of course, the participation of the US is based on bombing Fordo, and a possible impact of that happens, then things would become even worse. And we've heard, for instance, a lot of criticism to Russia during the war, during the operation Zaporozhye, on the possible impact on the nuclear reaction. We are not hearing from the international community similar type of discussions. So the implications for us is beyond the regional and the global. There is an actual direct impact or a possible direct impact on national security, on people's food, on people's water, but also on the ability to export oil out of Hormuz Strait, which will affect, of course, oil prices, but also shortage of energy security across the region. Another element, which is a strategic element, we will not see its impact today, but we will see it a little bit in the future, which is this continuous failure of the international global governance. There is no entity today that can stop Israel. It's not the UN, it's not the EU, it's not the GCC, it's not the Arab League, it's not the Islamic Cooperation Organization. No one can do that, let alone the US itself. Actually, the US now is participating. And this poses a bigger question. What type of fallback do we have when wars goes in? These are the type of questions the world has faced during World War I and World War II. These are the kind of questions that have changed the League of Nations to the UN. I don't know what is going to do. But the one thing that we know for sure is that when states and international organizations fail to do their job, they create a void. And it's individuals who fill in that void. So this is a problem where we could see a resurgence of things like Al-Qaeda, of things like Daesh in the region, because people cannot really take. And that's, as I said, it's a strategic implication that we might see in the future. I think at this point, it's very difficult for us to say that there is a clear outcome expected by Israel when it comes to the conflict, because we haven't seen a clear outcome out of Gaza operation. That has always been a bit confused, and it has expanded. The same thing can happen. The nuclear program cannot be taken out fully without huge implication on the Iranian people, but on the region around it. The issue of decapitation or even regime change, which is quite obviously becoming now a major part of the discourse, is not going to be an easy change. We've seen Hezbollah go and its leadership killed almost overnight. But until now, Israel is conducting a treasure hunt for the missiles that are not accounted for. And that also becomes, a major concern.
Mohammed, actually, it was very notable that you said that Israel was supposed to be a partner for regional security, but now it's becoming the source of regional insecurity. So what does that mean for the Israel-Gulf relations going forward, particularly the fate of even Abraham Accord, let's say? Secondly, the paradox with the US is, on the one hand, it is the only country that can rein in Israel. On the other hand, it's an active participant, maybe not directly, but indirectly, and at times directly as well, in this conflict. So where does this lead us in terms of the Gulf's diplomacy with the US, but also Gulf's broader effort in terms of de-escalation?
Well, on the first part, we will possibly see something similar to what happened in Europe when the tariff came out. The entire discourse in Europe was about realignment. We used to depend on the US as a major ally and now we are left alone. We will need to start thinking about strategic autonomy. These type of discussions is possibly going to be a reconsideration, reevaluation of our views about the region and the role of Israel. And I think possibly the UAE has been one of the forthcoming in trying to find a way for Israel to exist within the region, not only exist, extend its economic reach and cultural reach all the way across Asia, with the hope that this would convince Israel that there is a way for them to exist within the region once the Palestinian issue is solved. I think that's a major setback. I cannot say today, we don't want to make big speculations when an operation is going on, that this is going to happen or not. But I'm saying definitely, at least within circles of people like me, these questions, these scenarios are put down on the ground in the discussions. On the US did not join yet. And I think right now, possibly President Trump is pitching two different factions. There is a faction who's trying to get a deal with Iran, and there's a faction who's preparing to bomb down. And you say, well, whoever gets there first is going to have it. If Witkoff can get Iran to accept a deal, then that's fantastic, we're done. But if he cannot, then the war is coming in. This can be seen as some sort of a pressure on Iran, maybe, but it's a very, dangerous game if the Iranians think that we cannot submit to a deal that we will not be able to honor, or a deal that we will try and circumvent in the future, then that is a problem. What we were hoping for was a deal that Iran wants because it saves it economically. But a deal that Iran is forced to take is possibly going to face an attempt for circumvention in the future.
Mohammed, also in your remark, you laid the complexity or the multi-layered nature of the security challenges that the Gulf are facing from this war, from the traditional geopolitical security to the maritime security to the water security, food security, nuclear security. So the stakes for Gulf cannot be higher. Does that mean we should expect a concerted common Gulf diplomacy to put pressure on Israel and the US to find a diplomatic solution, or will it be more like an individual Gulf countries will be pursuing individual diplomacy to try to achieve the same result? By the way, I'm already combining questions that I see because we are receiving many questions in Q&A, so I'm combining them, paraphrasing them, so I'm monitoring it. So please post your question that I'm asking.
I think what we're seeing is most of the Gulf leaders are moving very fast on this. If you mean by consolidated as under the banner of the GCC, that is not the case. But the leaders of Saudi Arabia, of UAE, of Oman, of Qatar, they're all moving around. They're talking to everyone to trying to get a stabilization. I think part of it is to try even to convince Iran to see a certain compromise on a deal. But I think also the time is running short.
What kind of compromise are we referring to? Is it nuclear front? Because Iran was already at the table. So what
Iran was already at the table, but there were also differences on how much enrichment, where is the enrichment is going to happen? Is it national? Is it international? These were very technical issues that frankly needed time. I think Witkoff and his team wanted a provisional deal, an interim deal that would allow for more technical discussions. It didn't happen. My understanding, and this information might not be accurate, but my understanding, what I hear, is that the response from the Iranians on Witkoff's final proposal had a lot of the elements within the Witkoff's proposal, but there were also elements of what was described as face-saving measures from Iran that they wanted Witkoff to accept, and it doesn't look that Iran has surrendered everything. But the attack happened before those discussions could happen on Sunday.
Thank you. I mean, there are also obviously questions about the energy prices, the impact of the war on energy prices. So you can maybe very briefly touch what implication do you expect there?
On the energy aspect?
Yes.
Well,
A few questions.
as I mentioned, there is already an incident at the Strait of Hormuz. Other incidents, if the attacks start hitting, if we've got an oil spill because one of those incidents, then we're already in a position where the flow of tankers is going to be decreased. The prices of insurance are getting high, and the price of oil is getting high. This is not good, news for the GCC. High prices of oil are very disruptive. And I think people not only in the GCC, but India, Japan, Korea, China, these are the biggest buyers of GCC oil, are definitely calculating the impact on their own economy.
Senem, if I paraphrase few questions that I see in the chat box, I mean, one line of the argument that I see in the chat box, for Iran to de-escalate, it has to further escalate first. So do you think that this probably might be the case with Iran, with the calculation in Tehran? Secondly, I mean, all of us, we are talking about what US will or can do, but there are also quite many questions that is asking which other actors that can play a role there, like China, Russia, Gulf, Turkey. So which other actors can play a decisive role in reining in this war de-escalating?
Sure, thanks, Galeb. I mean, I think Iran is trying to escalate, albeit it is relatively boxed in. I mean, if you look at the scenarios, and I'm happy to list a few of them that are more openly discussed, there's not much Iran can do without risking further attacks, further isolation. I mean, if you look at the list, Iran can certainly, start advancing its nuclear program. It could, of course, formally kick out inspectors. It could exit the NPT. It could, over time, and this is by no means something easy, it could break out. And so the weaponization aspect is still there, all not good options, because I think Iran is trying to preserve what leverage it can to then use it at the negotiating table. So in that area, I think Iran is relatively boxed in. Iran has threatened to close the Straits of Hormuz for as long as I've been alive. It has yet to do so, really, because obviously that would harm Iran's interests, harm China's interests, and of course harm its neighbors' interests in the Gulf. And again, here it ties us to the threats of strikes and the blackmail Iran has used against its neighbors for quite some time. I think in this moment, striking Gulf, this is not 2019, this is 2025. Iran has worked to rebuild these bridges, and tensions still exist between Iran and the Gulf states. So attacking its neighbors would really be, I think, a case of last resort. And ultimately, I think these moves would also bring the United States into the conflict. And Iran is looking to have this really be an Israel-Iran war, not a regional war. So that, I think, is important to consider there as well. I think Iran probably still has tools in its arsenal of missiles that haven't come out yet. By estimates of those that are doing missile math, there are still quite a bit left that can be used. And again, it's a question of not overwhelming Israel, but tiring and wearing down Israel, and showing some impact and survivability that I think is important. Other actors, I think that's very important to think more broadly. Here, I think that there are, of course, players in Asia that are perceived to be more balanced in their approach. I think Europe at this point has completely wiped itself as a relevant mediator and relevant player, and compromised its ability to defend principles and law. I think here, other actors with interests in the region can include South Korea, for example. We haven't heard very much about what role they're playing. I think Turkey has been playing a very forward-leaning role. Erdogan, despite many tension points with Iran, recognizes that this is a moment of regional instability. And it's really interesting that for most of the region, this is a 2003 moment, and there's unity in preventing the regionalization of this war, if not the regime change in Iran, So I think what regional states do worry about and maybe don't want to say out loud is an outcome where Israel is the dominant military actor in the Middle East, and they're going to be pressured by Israel over a longer period of time. Israel has certainly got that military prowess, intelligence that is very striking, and regional states have been very pleased to see Iran degraded, the proxies, the militias brought down to size, and the landscape is definitely an opportunistic one for the region. But at the tail end of this, I think everyone is still concerned about Gaza, about the issue of the two-state solution that looms very much on the horizon, and of course is not at the forefront of our minds. The conference in New York has been canceled. The issue of statehood has been sort of tabled for the time being, and I think that's problematic. And I think a third actor that is trying to make the most of this crisis is Russia. Russia is a close partner of Iran. I'm careful not to use the word ally, because they have signed they've signed a defense treaty, and so the question is how if at all can Russia play a role? I'm skeptical that the Russians will come to a real support for Iran, but I think that they are trying to and can pick up the phone to Washington and find off-ramps here that would be important.
Well, thank you. I think one interesting observation that you also mentioned, the 2003 Iraq moment, whether we will see a similar regional diplomacy now, because like there was the Iraq neighboring conferences, diplomacy that was trying to prevent the war. Obviously, unfortunately, it did not. But it will be interesting that whether we will see a similar scenario that will be unfolding now. Ksenia, again, there are many questions around the specificity of the Israeli expectation from U.S. in terms of, does it the U.S. directly join in the war, or is it the capability providing the B-2 bunker buster bomb? So what are the exact expectations from the U.S.? And secondly, how this war is affecting the war on Gaza itself as well. So how is the picture there is evolving?
Yes, thank you, Galip. So, on the first question, I think it's clear that there is a scale of possibilities in regards to the aid that the United States can offer, or the involvement, the level of involvement, and so on. I think that the minimum that the Israeli leadership expects now from the US is not to stop the Israeli offense against Iran before Israel is done with all of its targets, before it believes that it completed some of the missions it stated. And again, not everything is published, not everything is known. The matter of this fact, some of these plans are secretive, and it's hard to say, so how much of the goals that the IDF has right now, was, so what was accomplished, was less accomplished, and so on, so, but there is an expectation that at least Trump will not pressure Israel into the ceasefire before it's time, so anything else seems that at this current stage, it's more of a bonus than anything else, because it's been now 4 days, and you can say that 4 days it's not long, but we remember a certain war that lasted for 6 days, and it was practically over on the 4th day. And sometimes 4 days it's enough to understand what is going on. So again, the expectation maximum, the maximum edge of the scale is, of course, full involvement of the US in this war, the use of the B-52, the anti-bunker bombs, the larger bombs, the mega bombs, the mother of all bombs. We remember Trump's expressions about that specifically. I think that there is this growing realization in Jerusalem that nobody is in a hurry. Nobody is in a hurry in Washington to do that. And just as my friend Mohammed Baron mentioned, there is the war of camps. in Washington. It may take time to understand, who has the upper hand. But for now, the attempt of Trump to explain that he both advances the America first, but at the same time, he believes that, America should do everything that Iran will not have its nuclear bomb. Well, in Israel, it's being perceived with a dose of reality. So there is currently at least no expectation of immediate involvement of the US. And regarding your second question, so I think that the answer on, on that, what is the effect of the war in Iran on the war in Gaza? Well, unfortunately, at the very first day of the warfare with Iran, there was this quote that belonged to somebody from the military command that right now the war in Gaza, it's not the first priority of Israel. It's secondary at best. The first priority is, of course, Iran. And so it was perceived by the relatives of the hostages and, by the parents of the soldiers who object the continuation of the war, that, yes, so this will be on a slow burner. This will continue until there will be clarity about what is happening with Iran. But for now, most importantly, the public discussion about the goal of the war in Gaza, it's over, it's done. There are no demonstrations, there are no debates about it in the studios. The attention of the whole world and of course of the Israeli is focused solely on Iran, Gaza. And you see that there is also, of course, less pressure on the Israeli leadership. Netanyahu, who was basically, you can say persona non grata for many European leaders for the last at least 8-10 months. There is this warrant of the Hague Court. His ministers are sanctioned by UK and by other countries as well, other countries in Europe and other countries outside. Suddenly he is getting all of the calls, all of the attention from the whole of the world. He is in the center. He likes to be in this position. He presents himself finally as a winner, something that he cannot do in the context of Gaza. So, this is a psychological dimension of that. I think it's important. And yes, the war is ongoing. There are more victims. And unfortunately, the human suffering continues.
Very briefly, a follow-up questions. There are questions in chat box, which basically, if I paraphrase, without the US involvement, to how long Israel can sustain this military confrontation with Iran, given that Iran's tolerance for pain probably is higher than that of Israel, because of the country has been in war under the sanctions for almost now half a century. So how do you see the threshold of pain for Israeli politics and society when you compare for the Iranian one, if we are in for a longer game?
It was believed indeed that for years that Israeli leaders actually prefer not to go to war. And that was something that Netanyahu also said repeatedly. We do not want to see the coffins of soldiers. We do not want to see the coffins of citizens. So therefore, he explained his policies vis-a-vis Hamas in this kind of fashion. But it seems that after 10/7, the threshold had changed. And also the public perception of how should you treat the unfinished business. So the business in vis-a-vis the Hamas is perceived now as the unfinished business. And what brought to, the mismanagement of this, what brought to this horrific tragedy and the massacre of 10/7, and then the war that is still ongoing. So I can tell you that for now, at least, I will repeat it, the consensus in the Israeli public is overwhelming. And you can see how online the rare critics of this war and those who ask about the end game are being viciously attacked, not only by the supporters of Netanyahu, the traditional forces that we know, but also by anybody else, who finally want to feel this satisfaction, this pride that Israel traditionally had, taking pride of its military, something that was put under doubt after 10/7. So now you have again, this significant change in perception of what Israel is, what IDF is, so this is something that perhaps can change in the future. Israelis are ready to sacrifice still.
Very quickly, actually, I will ask because I know Mohammed had to leave, and then to Mohammed and to Renat, very similar questions. There are few questions in terms of how this war is affecting the region's approach and perception of the US. So, and how will this affect the region's approach to countries like Russia and China going forward? Like Mohammed, in terms of Gulf. So how this is going to shape the region's view of US and approach to Russia and China as well?
Sorry, Gal, the question was to me.
Yes. So
Well,
particularly how this war is affecting the Gulf's view of the US and then its approach to Russia and China.
Until now, the US has been on the side of negotiations. Actually, it took the side of the GCC when it comes to engagement with Iran. Until now, the US is not part of the war. I mean, we will have to wait and see whether, to what extent is the US is going to participate, if it does participate, or will it actually manage to pull off an agreement that can put things aside. Iran has so far said that they're willing to go for a ceasefire if there is a ceasefire from the Israeli aspect. They also said that they're willing to engage with the nuclear talks. We haven't heard something similar from the Israelis yet. On the contrary, Israelis are talking about a larger bank of targets. And again, as I agree with Ksenia, these are operational issues. You wouldn't know what are those targets are. But even the idea that the number of missiles has went down from 100 to 70 to something like 30, I mean, there are two ways of looking at it. One of them is what Ksenia has mentioned, that this is a depletion of Iran's ability to launch. But on the other side, it could also be a message to the US, look, we're already reducing, we're already scaling back, we're giving you a small carrot to carry. This is an intention that we can actually reduce. It would possibly go back to the first question that you've asked, Sanam, which is, what is this all about? And I think right now, at least from the Israeli aspect, it's an elimination rather than just decapitation or even degrading. They want to eliminate the missile program. They want to eliminate the nuclear program. That's why the zero enrichment came up. And they also want to eliminate the leadership. They've talked seriously, obviously, about an assassination of Ali Khamenei, which means practically a regime change. So these are objectives that are very difficult to achieve without huge repercussions in the region. Now, the question that you've asked about Iran and China, Iran and India and China and others, and I would bring in Brazil in this, I would bring in South Africa and a huge number of countries, what we call the Global South. These are countries with huge number of people. Their wealth is not as the G7, but the G77 comprise 134 countries. These countries are taking a position, that looks at Israel as a potential danger now. If Iran used to be the destabilizer, it is not. It's actually playing according to international law. They're saying that we are having a proportionate response to an attack. Israel says that they're having an attack that is trying to preempt a certain program, but it is an unprovoked attack in international law. So these are type of new dynamics that we haven't seen in the past. And it's definitely going to affect the way people are looking at what security means. It will affect what does international security. If US used to be the guarantor of international security, now with this type of war, we're back into the war on Iraq, and we've seen how that affected the US standing in the region, even almost until today.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Venat, almost exactly the same question. How do you expect the US presence in the region to be affected by what is happening?
Yeah, I want to pick up on this point that Mohammed made, that the region, but the world is a far more dangerous place. I mean, we just published this report on Accept, and last year, 2024, had the highest number of conflicts since World War II. So the number of conflicts each year is increasing. And I think, you know, the post-October 7th Middle East, Israel's violence, you know, as well in Gaza and Palestine, elsewhere, and the war with Israel and Iran are all parts of this global transformation where human rights, international law, terms, you know, are no longer relevant. And in the global South, you know, as Mohammed is saying, many people are no longer seeing there being either a U.S. security architecture or even this rule-based order that supposedly governed the world. I mean, this is all out the door. And, you know, Israel, both in terms of military is showing the world what war will look like, but also in terms of sort of international law is showing the world what war will look like as well. And I think, you know, from the region then, yes, there's still, you know, many of this in the region, especially the countries that we cover, are no longer buying this post-World War II idea of spheres of influence. You're either East or West. You're communism or democracy, good, bad. All of these binaries don't work anymore. This is a region, you know, where, yes, it's awash with economic deals, yet at the same time, it's embroiled in wars. So something is not happening here. Peace settlements aren't leading to sustainable peace. And so relationship with China, with India, with others become really important as the region begins to see where this global order is moving towards.
Well, thank you very much. We are 1 minute beyond our allocated time, so I'm very much grateful to both speakers and participants. I think it has been a very lively conversation about you know, a subject. I mean, well, I would have one last question. I would have, because everyone talks about deal, but without specifying deal. So normally I would have actually one last question potentially to Sanam about a deal, but I don't know whether we have more minutes. Do we have? Because I want to get what a deal would look like. Sanam, would you like to step in?
I'll just give you a 1 minute answer. I mean,
Okay.
I think we can't get into the technicalities of a deal, but I think there is certainly room for an off-ramp, you know, a temporary ceasefire to test the appetite for deal making, I think is the space that could be created. And this is where President Trump and the U.S. administration's influence is certainly going to be important. If a Vance-Witkoff meeting takes place with the Iranians and with Gulf support to build out the contours of the deal, a trial run for a deal that could really open the window and see if the Iranians are serious. And then if the Iranians are not serious, obviously then you can all go in and pile in and get the job done with the United States. But to get the job done without having tested what the parameters of a deal might look like, I think is, of course, very dangerous, particularly for all of the prognosticators of regime change, knowing the history of regime change, and of course the uncertainty on the horizon. I would think this is a better outcome to manage the transition in Iran, the change in the regime that is inevitably coming, rather than, of course, to be driving it uncontrolled car and letting it fall off of a bridge.
Well, thank you very much. With this one, once again, I would like to thank all the speakers and all the participants. That has been, as I said, like a quite lively discussion about quite a concerning and distressing developments in the region. So hope to see you for our other events, webinars, publication around the subject. So please keep following our works, both through our social media channels, but through our website. So hope to see you for a next event soon. Thank you very much again.